I'm so excited about this presentation. I have a formal introduction of Summer, but before I get into that, I do want to say my wife is also a homeschooler and is always scouring the internet for resources. And usually she used to say, so-and-so whose blog I read.
Yeah.
And then eventually Summer's name kept coming up over and over again. And I do some work with neurodiversity in the college setting. And my wife's like, well, you gotta hear what Summer's saying. You gotta hear what Summer's doing. And so this is from one of her websites. As an autistic mother rearing autistic children in the faith, Summer Kinard knows firsthand many of the gifts and challenges of life with disabilities. She brings her extensive background in patristic theology. Don't you miss that? Extensive background in patristic theology and catechesis. So she's really studied this stuff. BA in religion, MDiv, THM, in early church history and theology, to skillfully weave together the healing pattern of holy tradition with the daily patterns of life. An engaging speaker and dynamic workshop leader, Summer shares her hard-earned wisdom with her audience, walking with them through the narrow places of community life with disabilities. She's also the author of Accessible Church School Incarnation Practices for Participating in God and Our Autistic, and also wrote Our Autistic Home, a handbook for autistic thriving, coming this winter, and the children's board book, Come, Stay, Fetch, the Gospel According to Dogs. My wife just read this book to me before I came here. She didn't know I was going to be able to introduce Summer, but it's the sweetest and most theologically profound children's book that probably has less than 30 words in it. The whole gospel is there. And beautiful. She's also the owner and senior editor of Park End Books, which after hearing her speak, I'm sure you'll be interested in whatever books she is publishing and what she's bringing together. So please welcome Summer.
Thanks, y'all. So I appreciate you coming here today. And yes, I have a lot of patristic background, but I'm not going to quote every single person because when I'm listening to names, I'm like, even though I know who they are. So what I'll do, I'll go ahead and tell you ahead of time, I am going to be pulling a lot from St. Augustine, but also from the West. The things that are not familiar to you are probably from him. Unlike most Orthodox people, and this is not, I'm not saying this in a catty manner, it's just not taught. I've read almost everything he's written. I haven't read all his sermons. I have them on my shelves. But I've read all of his treatises in the City of God several times, and I've taught those things as well, and confessions and all these things. So actually, I don't have a stereotype about him. And a very important work I'm pulling on today, I did not footnote any of this, is his On the Trinity, which is often misunderstood. So this is important as a corrective, and I love the Eastern Fathers, and they agree with St. Augustine. So I also studied extensively the Cappadocians and St. John Chrysostom and St. Cyril of Jerusalem and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and get in here because what we're going to talk about today has to do with patristics first. And that is the image of God. So how we talk about being in the image of God matters to how we see each other as persons. So last night, His Eminence actually brought up the image of God, and he talked about the Logos, yes? So the Logos of God is how we're in the image of God, the Logos, right? Sometimes this has been misunderstood, though. So this is true that we are in the image of God, the Logos. I really should have brought a pen to write. There's one. I like to write on the board. I'm going to do that. Okay. This is kind of like, I don't like not moving, so let's see if these work. We're going to find out. So this is, Trinitarian math is fun. So does anyone here have a visual impairment? So I should describe this as well. No? Okay, I'm going to describe it a little bit for people who are listening. I'm going to write this down. So image of God is what I'm writing down. And I have this on slides, but it's a lot more boring on a slide. Okay, so on the image of God, and a lot of times in the Fathers you hear the Logos, right? Why do we say we're in the image of God, the Logos? Because Christ is the Logos, right? So one of the problems is when we start to translate this in English, it comes out as rationality.
Yeah.
Okay? Or reason. And then people say, we're made in the image of God because we have reason. This is true, we do. That's true. But people don't know what that means. In English, it means a very specific thing. Another thing that we say is we're made in the image of God because we have a free will. This is true, too. Oops. Fun thing about being dyslexic is sometimes I write words out of order. So I'll get there. Okay, so free will. So this is another one of the ways that we're in the image of God. It's through the free will, logos. We also have one more thing that you will hear, the intellect. This is not exactly the same as reason. It's a slightly different train of thought. The fathers don't always talk to each other, and they don't always solidify the language. But when you look at all of it, since thankfully we have a little bit of time between us, we get to see the Catholic and apostolic tradition, right? So this word intellect, right now, it's causing these particular things. All three of these things cause a lot of problems because of the way they're understood. Okay, it doesn't mean that they're bad. These are all true. But the way they're understood. So we're going to talk today about what does intellect mean a little bit, and we're going to talk about this thing, free will. Did anyone, have you heard the word autonomy? Yeah, okay. A lot of times people use free will to mean autonomy or self-determination or self-interest, right? Hey there, I'm writing on the board, even though this is also in the slides. It's not as cool looking. I like doing it in 3D instead. Self-determination, self-rule. Problem with this is you often have, it's not just the idea of self. You hear this in the terms, anytime a theologian utters the word individual, I become deeply suspicious. That's not a theological word.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist in theology. The theological word is person. So this is why I said persons, sacred persons. Okay, so I want you to see kind of where this is going. Sometimes people say reason, so if you don't have a capacity for reason that people can measure, doesn't mean they don't. One thing that's fun about autism is, if you have or anybody with a communication challenge is, expressive language is also often what you're really measuring. You're not usually really measuring someone's cognitive ability. You're measuring their expressive language ability. So a lot of times this and the intellect get collapsed into cognitive ability. So I'm going to write this. Question mark. So people like me, I'm one of the weirdos. So I'm an autistic person, so I'm one of the between 5 to 20%, however you count it, of the people in the world who are autistic. And then amongst those, I'm one of the 5% who's a savant. So I'm weird. So I have a lot of cognitive ability, but about 70% of autistic people do. 70% of autistic people have a high IQ, whatever that means. But my cognitive ability is off the charts. However, I also have something else that's off the charts, and that's empathy. And that is why I can see the thing that actually matters here. So all of these things together, intellect, rationality, whatever, logos, free will, means something different because we don't have a thing called an individual. And people are not just in the image of God the Father, and we're not just in the image of mastery. So there's something that people in America especially, and in the English language, love to do. We like to talk about how we can rule things. We love to rule things because we have these cultural narratives of going out and conquering, of manifest destiny, of pioneering, of colonizing, of empire, right? And also, I'm not going to start picking on people, but also the East also has the golden age of empire, Christian hegemony, whatever. If we're in charge, that's how it should be, okay? We have this cultural history of ruling. And because of that, we tend to look for ruling everywhere. And we also have this idea of rugged individualism. I'm telling you that because these are lasting pieties that are kind of sticking around and are coloring our language. Even, and I say this with great respect, even the language of some of our saints. So Saint Sophrony, he uses this idea of self-determination. He talks about it, self-determination, free will, even to the extent that you could choose to be separated from God. Because your goal is the free will, self-determination, self-mastery. Not just self-mastery, that's like asceticism, but being able to do this. However, this is all wrong to some extent. And the reason this is a bad drawing is because we're in the image of the Trinity. We're not in the image of one thing. We're in the image of the Holy Trinity. The Imago Dei, the image of God, is Trinitarian. And this matters very, very much because of how we are made, how we can see in our cognitive functioning, and in how we deal with attention. Whenever we are paying attention to something, it's called triadic. And I don't think that's a coincidence. So we're going to talk about how we get there, and I'm going to tell you why this matters. So here we go. How we talk about God matters. I've written it down on the board. Here we go. So the image of God is the aspect of the person that seeks to understand and to know God. This is a universal in all humans, whether or not it's even an anencephaly. I'm putting that out explicitly because a lot of times in bioethics, people will use those born without brains as some sort of like with just a brainstem, as a test case for what makes a human. And a lot of times they'll say, this is not a human. Yeah, you are. Yeah, they're definitely, theologically, they're a person. Not only are they a person, but they have all of the full capacity of free will. And we're going to see why. So we have this idea, and it's described variously as the will, the intellect. The nous is a better thing. I didn't tell you anything about the intellect yet, but the intellect here, this does not mean cognitive ability. So I don't know if I made that clear. I got off on a tangent there. Forgive me. So that's why I drew it, so I can follow my own tangent. But this means the perceptive faculty of the soul. Okay? That's what it means. It doesn't mean, and sometimes you could say nous, noetic. That's better than intellect, but it's actually, the nous is more specific in hesychism with the mind descending and the heart meeting. It's like what the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament will say, the nefesh, or the thing where your soul is, right? So yes.
Just don't follow. When you're talking about the intellect and the nous, they're separate things? Are you talking like the intellect as your brain, or is the nous?
I'm explaining it right now. You asked the question while I was literally explaining.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. So it's a perceptive faculty of the soul. So what I was trying to say is a better word for it would be nous or noetic. So is it, if you talk about it as nous or noetic, it's better than intellect and intellectual because we misunderstand those. But what I'm trying to say is I'm using a different language. I'm just saying perceptive faculty. And the reason I'm saying this is because nous and noetic have a very specific theological meaning now since St. Joseph the Hesychist. And when we talk about the nous being the heart and the soul, like the mind descending into the heart or something. So it's slightly different, but it's still true. I just want you to know this can be technical language, but it also is much better than intellect. So I'm using perceptive faculty of the soul here, but yeah, nous and noetic are the better words. So the reason I say perceptive faculty of the soul, because it's, you'll see. I'll show you. So one of the things that happens, the image of God, right? So the intellectual faculty of the soul is universal, but the corollary is, so people will say in animals, well, if you have a perceptive faculty of the soul, this is the way that you're practicing free will. This is a way of distinguishing between us and animals. This is how it classically came about. So a lot of times in theology, we'll summarize things now and we'll talk about it as though it had no context. But the context a lot of time was, well, how are we different from the animals? And they're like, oh, we have the ability to rule. Or so, no, that's not supposed to be by itself. It was in contrast to the animals. Or it's in contrast to people who are treating each other bestially. The Roman Empire was killing how many hundreds of thousands of people a year in their spectacles? They would go out and they would just kill people for entertainment. So they were contrasting the behavior of the Christians with the behavior of the pagans and saying that's bestial, that's base. And so when they did that, they were using this idea of training your instincts and having virtues, right? That's true still. But whenever I'm talking about the intellectual faculty of the soul by itself, or the image of God this way, the corollary is actually imprinting. It's not versus beast being able to rule. It's imprinting. So whenever an animal is born, what do? They imprint on their parent. It's more like this mammal thing or the birds or whatever. They see something and they immediately love it. They know who they're looking for. The shepherd, the sheep knows its shepherd's voice, these things. Imprinting is a much better corollary. I'm not trying to say we're imprinting on God. I'm trying to give you a better analogy than just ruling over things. Okay? So this would be the better if you come across these. So when we talk about the idea of the will, as self-determination. This is the thing that actually leads to hell, literally. The reason is, the classic test question for this version of freedom is whether God would allow someone to freely choose hell. So this is what St. Sophrony says. He likes to talk about hell. We love him, though. Okay, St. Sophrony has brilliant things to say about the nous, about the intellect, about the way that God comes to us and has the saving effect of Christ on the way that we think. It's beautiful. But also, whenever he talks about, well, would God allow you to, the tyranny, I think he says the tyranny of the freedom to even be able to choose your own destruction. I'm going to argue with him on this. I don't think that that's inappropriate. I think that's from philosophy, and I don't think that is from theology. So this is why I'm bringing it up. So when you get into bioethics and you get into how do we treat people, a lot of times what our standards of practice, I am getting this from the point of view of somebody who is a parent and as someone who studies things. I've gone to SLP's conferences. I'm not an SLP. Do not have any kind of medical degree. Okay, so I'm not saying that. So I'm saying this, you may have a slightly different thing. I'm reading it as a little bit of an outsider. But from what I understand, the standards of practice, when I look at them, a lot of times, in the way that I've experienced them and observed them, they are basing the idea of the free will and mastery and things like this on the idea of autonomy. Okay, because that's what our culture at large is based on. And sometimes this even gets into our theology. And what I'm trying to say is, no, we should not have it in our theology. And there's good reasons. So here's this, self-mastery, yes. Even if we were to have self-mastery, it would not be free unless it were free from seeking to master others. So here's where I'm going to bring in some Western fathers. So I'm talking about St. Augustine now. This is anytime I say self-mastery or will to master over others, I'm talking about St. Augustine. So this is in his City of God, especially. And he talks about whenever the problem with human nature and the fall is that humans are fundamentally social, okay? The first thing that God said was not good. Does anyone remember what it was?
Be alone.
Being alone is the first bad thing. So the first sin wasn't eating this stuff. The first sin was, why were they alone? This is the first problem. So if they hadn't been alone, it wouldn't happen anyway. So when they were alone, they start to get their wills distorted, and they start to get confused about what they're for and what the world is for. So being alone is a problem. And one of the reasons it's a problem is because we're made in the image of the Holy Trinity. And the Holy Trinity, that does not mean that we have three wills, because God doesn't have three wills, or 3 in 1, whatever. We don't have to go through and say everything about the Trinity about ourselves. It means that we're made for community. You distinguish the Holy Trinity through relationship. We're made for community with God. And so this fundamental communal way of thinking is what our will, the only way our will can be free, is what I'm arguing. So when you think of freedom of the will as ability to master rather than the ability to communicate, you have no obvious remedy for the broken social systems and interactions that inhibit the exercise of goodwill by any one person. That's a complicated way of saying this, right? That's a lot of words, right? So you have, you know that sometimes you can't do what you want, right? Obviously. Well, sometimes people have a disability and they can't do what they want all the time. Is their will therefore not free? According to this classic understanding, which is actually pagan, put Sophocles and Antigone over here. It's a tragedy. It was not a goal. Okay? Whenever we talked about autonomy, we weren't supposed to say, this is for us. No, this is supposed to be something we would see. Oh, terrible idea. We don't want that. Okay? People made the mistake of embracing it. Okay, so whenever we have somebody and we see their self-determination or their ability to do what they want as a freedom, then we don't have a way to help them except for to master them. And this is where you get therapies, like I'm going to criticize certain types of therapies, where you tell people compliance-based therapies rather than teaching people how to thrive. So I don't want to pick on people in particular. I know that there's variation within ABA community, but it's often been criticized for this. It's not the only thing that does that. There are a lot of ways that people talk to autistic people, especially, but a lot of disabled people, where they will treat them like a thing or like someone to be controlled or like something to be trained, rather than someone who has free will, who just maybe is expressing it differently. And I'm going to argue that free will can only be communal. So you cannot be free unless I will your freedom as well. If I will the good for you and she wills the good for you, and we're willing each other's good, this is a triadic attention. This is a triadic free will. We have to be free together. And this is what we see in the church. So I'm saying this and you're like, well, this sounds crazy and socialist. It's not. It's from the church, okay? It's from how we participate in God. Because you want to love God and you want to love your neighbor, and we do this together. You cannot do it alone. It's absolutely impossible. Show me anyone who has. Nobody, including Christ, and this is our model. Okay, so one of the things that we have whenever you have the autonomy idea, Pia Matthews, who's a Catholic, a Roman Catholic writer on disability and bioethics, she does a really great, summarizes it really well by saying you have the problem of the threshold of respect. And she talks about, in her book, Discerning Persons, she talks about people with severe cognitive challenges or even people with anencephaly, like the people that most medical professions or hospital systems, let's say insurers, will write off as not valuable or not capable of living or not persons. So she's trying to say, actually, no. But she talks about the threshold of respect, and I really like that language because what she says is, people will assign a threshold of respect based on whether a patient can exercise choice for their own interest. So they'll say, if you don't show interest in things, then you're not really a person. This happens a lot with autistic people. This is why I'm using this language also. Also in diagnosing autistic people, oh, well, you're interested in other people, therefore you can't be autistic. Autistic people are interested in other people. Okay, but this is language that's really mixed up. It feels like it's abstract, but it really happens a lot, so... yeah. Patients being able to exercise choice for their own interests is one of the ways that value is assigned or respect is given. And a lot of bioethical decisions are made on the basis of the idea that your will that requires assistance is not free. So, Gran has dementia, so her will requires assistance. She's not free anymore. To some extent, we do have to take care of people in that state. We have to take care of them, but the freedom then goes to whom? We actually do a better job with this than with autistic people. What do you do usually? Like when my mother came to hospice, I had her power of attorney. You switch your powers. The legal definition. I'm not saying you should put people in conservatorships. Don't make a leap to autism right now. But I'm trying to say we know realistically, at least in that context in the medical world, that we know that someone else has to take care of somebody. But that does not make them less of a person. It makes them still a person who needs extra care. So we see it there. And who else do we see this? So I'm picking extremes. Babies, right? Babies have to be cared for. We have to love them. And ideally, this triadic community exists when they're born, that they have parents who love each other and love them and are able to exercise goodwill on their behalf. Okay, and then everyone can grow in goodwill and freedom of will. So the baby's able to be free and choose and grow because of the goodwill of the parents and the community. And we do this for other people in those extremes, but sometimes we miss it, especially in autism, because we have a problem of empathy as well, of missing each other's cues. So double empathy makes this worse. I can have empathy with an autistic person easily, but someone else might not have as much empathy with an autistic person as easily, may not know what they're thinking right away. But the double empathy problem is part of a bigger problem, and that's the idea of assigning value to a life. But we don't do that in the church. We are not trying to assign value based on being able to use somebody, either their self-interest or how useful they are. And the reason is because people aren't supposed to be used, okay? We're supposed to be loved and enjoyed in love with God. And this is where the freedom of the will comes in. So a freedom of the will is not about being useful, and it's not about being valuable. It's about being loved with God. So the true freedom of the will, St. Augustine says this, and it's really cool. He says the true freedom of the will. He talks about freedom like a lot, okay? And he has a whole bunch of different ways to talk about it. But the highest, best, is to cling to God in love. So if you can cling to God in love, that's when your will is free, to be able to do that. And this affects, he says that in the resurrection, nobody's going to want more than they have. And the reason is they're no longer going to want to control or master other people, because that Mastery, the will to master other people, is what fallen nature is. Concupiscence or fallenness, it's not lust. People are like, oh, he says lust is the main problem and it's about sex. No. He does not. He says it's concupiscence, mastery. So he says mastering other people is original sin. That desire to master, it comes out of being alone. You can't think this if you're outside, if you're in community with God, right? When you break community with God, you start trying to master things. And this was the false image of mastery. But we sometimes have accidentally taken up that false image and inserted it into our theology the way we talk about it now. I'm not trying to say the fathers did this. So we're misunderstanding it. And so I'm going back and I'm telling you the missing piece is St. Augustine and to cling to God in love. And we love our neighbors. Okay, this is an important word. I'm going to say with. With God. Oops, sorry. Did that thing I do. With God. Sorry, with God and because of God. So if you're going to have something triadic, it's always, whenever St. Augustine said humans are made in the image of God, sometimes people, at God the Trinity, people misunderstood this about the way he talked about the love. And what he said was, you see this in the way people love each other. I love someone, and that beloved person loves me. Okay, but the best joy is when we can love another. And then I have someone to love them with. And they have someone to love this one with. And they can love me together. So whenever you love, it multiplies and it does this. So he's not trying to say the Trinity is exactly like this. He's saying this is the way we're in the image of the Trinity, where we can see the pattern of God's community in our lives and the way human attention works. And this is actually what free will is. So when we take out mastery of others, X, that's gone in the resurrection. Okay, and why am I reasoning from the resurrection? Because this is also Christ. What do we see? Well, Christ is the suffering servant, the kenotic Christ in Philippians chapter 2. Okay, that he's self-emptying. So our image of God is Christ, and he's kenotic. And so if we want to look to the resurrection, and we want to look to creation, we're made in Christ's image. It's not about ruling. It's not just about having any of those words, being rational. The rationality, the intellect, the nous, the free will, all of that stuff is actually pointing to this. And sometimes because the fathers are belovedly long-winded, people miss the fact that they have said one thing somewhere and something else somewhere else. So this is the thing, I want you to get excited about this. Okay, St. John, not John, yes, him too, God bless him. St. Gregory the theologian says something crazy. He says, okay, you will have, through your intellect, this thing, whatever this intellect, whatever we call it, okay, you're going to be able to, by participating in God, have the fullness of the Godhead in your heart. That sounds insane. What? Okay, here's why you know that he's talking about this. No mastery, cling to God in love, kenotic Christ, and not autonomy. Because you cannot choose your little tiny self-determined person, turn it on itself, to some degree, cannot choose to have the wholeness of God in himself. That would be a nonsensical question. St. Gregory, the theologian, isn't, oh, I'm sorry, that's me telling myself something. Who knows? Okay. So, let's see here. So, you cannot choose to have the whole fullness of the Godhead in your heart. That's crazy. But if your free will, if the will that God has made you in the image of God is communal, for communion, if it's fundamentally communicative rather than mastering, rather than determinative. So communicative, not determinative. Wow, that's really terrible. I'm sorry. You can't always read my writing this way, because I actually usually write in cursive still.
Nice.
Because I'm a grown-up. Yeah, so I would try to write in print, but it gets really crazy, so forgive me. It's communicative, not determinative. That's the will, okay? Because of that, when you see that, so you see it in the Eastern Fathers as well, but they assume you already knew this. And the problem is whenever we teach people in the East, the Eastern Fathers, we start with philosophy, which was bad examples. This wasn't what the Fathers were saying. And so we tend to read this crazy self-determination into the great theologians, the Cappadocians, and St. John Chrysostom, and St. Cyril of Jerusalem. And we miss the point. which was that Christ, the canonic Christ, is there. This is our model. Okay, I think I've told you. Are you convinced? Okay, so here I'm going to move to this. This is why why it matters. So what if the will cannot be free alone? And in the church, in how we are now, and how we were made originally, it can't be. We were not made to be alone. Okay? So if you put someone, in the God bless the 20th century. People had the worst experiments. They were like, what if we put someone in the wilderness and see what they do? Just, with no people. Okay, they went crazy. You're not supposed to. That could have been predicted. Right. What if the free will is empathetic? What if it's kenotic, self-emptying, okay? What if it's social? What if free will requires community and requires communion with God? So in the secular world, you can't go, you need communion with God. But, you can know that you need communion with God as a caregiver in order to be part of the community for that person. What if it is self-emptying, not self-seeking? Not demonstrated in mastery, but in community. Or what I said, communicative, not determinative, because I like to use long Latin words. Forgive me. So free will is not based on philosophical notions of autonomy. You get it now. But on the this just means incarnate. Nature of Christ, the incarnate Son, anthropic. I really can read and write. Okay, let's see here. So here we go. It's a mutual goodwill. The will that's free and in God's image is a mutual goodwill. We're made for community. Now, this is why it matters for autistic persons. When you see autistic persons as seeking community, now they're not just people who are bad at self-mastery. There's no way to help them then. You can master them yourself. That's the only solution. It's a bad idea. That whole paradigm's broken. But if you see them as seeking community, and this is their free will, but just maybe in atypical ways, okay, then you have a way forward. They're not failing to self-determine. They're seeking community. Now, we have this phrase that everybody who's in autistic therapy or care should know, it's not the next slide. Well, I thought it was. I'm going to build up to that again in a minute. So the free will, persons in the image of God, the Holy Trinity, it's not selfish, it's not individualistic, it's not self-determining, it's relational, right? We have to, I already said that. The will's truth, I said those already, because I did this first. Yes. This is the thing I meant to say. This is the thing I was saying before, behavior is communication. So we have this thing that we say in good autism therapies. If you're talking to somebody and they say this phrase, they're probably onto something. Okay? Behavior is communication. Very, very, very important, especially as we're finding now that I don't think we have a number yet that research is ongoing in the Gestalt language processing world, but we have now research coming in showing that a large percentage of autistic people formerly thought to be nonverbal are just processing language differently. And when you learn how to pay attention to it, you could actually build fluent language. So this is building fluency with somebody by paying attention to behavior. So this is what I say. Our goal, and my goal whenever I'm teaching, I said it before, I'm a Christian ed director. I also teach my kids, my 5 children, and I teach wherever I'm asked to teach. So you observe behavior, but you shape attention. The thing that you shape is attention. So you observe the behavior. Don't try to modify behavior. It won't work. It'll work for 5 minutes, and it doesn't really work. It has no effect. Because we're not trying to master anything. If you're trying to master someone else's quote-unquote free autonomous will, you can make them do what you want for a while. But that's not what the will is for. Then nobody's free. But if you have a free will that's communal, then you need attention. So free will is about loving community, and community and love are formed through attention. And now we get to the thing that I love the best. That's talking about the order of attention. So everybody, y'all know this. If there's anyone like a neuroscientist in here, some of y'all, okay, so they can feel like I can cite all these things. I did not cite it in here, but you have a type of, before you're aware of your thought, you almost instantly have this order of attention, and everyone has it. Even if you have a brainstem, you have this. Everyone feels first, okay? And this is almost instantaneous, but it's still important, because if you're conscious of it, you can form it. Okay, you feel first. This is both sensory and emotional input. It's immediate. So for me, if I had turned the lights on in here and you came into the horrible, these lights are really bad, these fluorescent lights, it would have been really painful. And you'd have been like, oh, I don't want to be in here. We came in and said, and it's like naturally lit and there's church bells and we're on this beautiful campus. we have a setting here where you're safe. Like I felt free last night at like 9:30, 10 at night to walk by myself to the lake and back because, looking at statues of Jesus in the dark. That was cool because it's safe, right? And I was like, this is like Athelion in Lord of the Rings, man. It's like, that's a king. Okay, I'm sorry. It's immediate. This happens immediately. So if someone comes into your office or into your classroom or wherever you're practicing, they're going to immediately have these impressions. It's going to affect their interoception. So do y'all know what that word means? Interoception is the stuff that you feel on the inside, how your body is, whether you're hot or cold, whether you're scared, whether you're cozy. A lot of times people just stop at hunger, thirst, heat, and cold, but it's actually whether you're scared or whether you're cozy also. Do you feel safe? Okay, if you feel safe, you know immediately if you feel safe. Even though you may not consciously know it, but you know it. Whenever you are building gut feelings or long-term memories, interoception is your darling. That's the thing that you're shaping. And that's complicated because autistic people have weird interoception usually. So it also, how you feel affects what you see. You see this a lot, and there's so many studies in different contexts, but like for crimes, if someone's afraid, they'll see certain things. But also if you go into a setting and you're happy, you see more and you see differently than if you're sad. There's so much research on this. I didn't cite one thing, but there's a lot of it. So I'm also giving you this word here, cognitive access points, which is just trying to say the more that your body can engage it with sensorily and not just with your sight. So if I show you a picture of Christmas lights, if I show you a picture on the screen, you'll be like, oh, okay. But if they're in the room with you, you can come mess with them. Okay, well, then it's very different. You have a lot more cognitive access points for this. I offered you guys, y'all didn't take me up on it, some whippy sticks. Y'all, come on. If you want to fiddle with something, you're welcome to touch them. We have kinetic sand here. Just anything to touch, okay? The more that you touch something specifically, the more your brain and your cognition is engaged. But especially touch, but it's your whole body. Yeah, and I'm going to gross motor more than fine motor. It's mostly gross motor because that's most of your... A lot of the stuff I'm saying is based on what goes on in the middle of your brain, music and gross motor. So you can piggyback almost everything off of it, okay? So we'll talk more. What did I do there? I don't know why this spacing is weird. I'm going to blame something. Okay, so the next thing is you see second. Now, what you see is affected by your emotional and sensory comfort level, right? So fear or anxiety changes what you see. I already said this, but visual supports, this is an interesting thing. They can help you to interpret feelings. So you see this not only with autistic people who have trauma. You can do the same thing. I put it in here. So there's a slide a little bit later that shows you some examples of visual schedule type things. Oh, I should have grabbed one. On the vendor table, I have visual schedules for the Orthodox liturgy. So you can look at those. And a visual schedule is important because it's a list with images. And that list with images it supports executive function. Sometimes people try to play with this and they'll say, oh, I'm going to turn it into a roadmap or put images all, like that's not a list anymore, so it doesn't work. So, it's cute, but it doesn't work because you need to have something to go click, 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 click. Visual supports help. This is why people do visual stories. This is why some people like graphic novels, right? There's a lot of things. You want to interpret the feelings. And I said that in feelings. That's very important. One of the things that happens in trauma or also with autism, and I don't know why they overlap, your feelings and what you see will be dissociated and so that you can't make a story of it. But if you put them together, sometimes a visual support will help you to put it together so that you can then make a story. This is one of the reasons iconography is so powerful also. I'm not trying to say iconography is only powerful for this. Of course it is. God made the world, okay? It's not a surprise, but this is one of the reasons it's so effective. It's because you're working with the way we are. One of the things that really helps is showing things when you tell. So if I told you, well, you can just get some earmuffs, but you're like, great. But if I show you these things, if you put them on yourself, you can. They block about 28 decibels. It's really important for someone who's hypersensitive to sound. And if somebody starts to get dysregulated or they work too hard or they're tired or they're just doing a whole lot, the brain's on full burn, they will often get there if they have hyperacusis of any time. Yeah, I did that. I took out my ear. Yeah, bless my heart. Anyways, I shouldn't have demonstrated that. Should have gotten volunteer. Anyway, did you find it?
That's the back.
You're awesome.
Nice.
Thank you. Well, my earrings are in my pocket, so I don't do that again. These things really help because hyperacusis is like hearing, it's hearing things 7 times as loud. It's crazy. I have it, so it's not activated right now. I'm cool. I've been walking a lot. But whenever you have it, it's really, really painful. It's physically painful. And so having these options, like touching it, if I'm telling you about it, you're like, okay, but when you see how easy it is, like if you have someone come in and you just have these available, it's really easy. You're going to do a lot better regulating things if you make things, if you show when you, well, using those, yes, but if you show when you tell. So I hope you understand that better than if I just said it, right? That makes attention a lot easier. The other thing is that if you're going to show someone writing, it really, really helps if you don't just say, okay, Jennifer, this is a picture of a heart. But instead you're all like, look, we're drawing a heart together. If you're showing it, if you're doing it, the action of doing it together matters a whole lot more. So if you can at all possible make things in the presence, that's why I wrote on the board, even though my writing's great. And my drawings are super. Ta-da, hearts. Okay, it's a Trinitarian heart. Just joking. Anyway, so we're going to have our little, actually, for the Trinity, you have to do it like that. Yeah. Anyway, so you do it in person. So do it live. If you're going to just use visual medium, if you can at all make it happen in person, that's better than just showing a picture because of these cognitive access points and showing while you tell. So one of the things I try to teach people in Christian education is do not, please, for the love of all that is holy, try to teach the faith by giving someone a coloring sheet. It doesn't teach you anything. It's like trying to teach someone to cook by saying, draw this picture of soup and color this picture of soup, okay? Here's your picture of soup. All right, are you hungry still? Why, you weirdo? Like, and we blame people for not having faith, but all we're doing is telling them to color a picture of soup. But what we do instead is you can draw it. If you want to teach iconography, if you draw the picture together, then you are teaching alongside and saying, why are we drawing this? Actually, this is a really cool thing. I'm going to tell you this even though it's a freebie, okay? It's not part of this lecture, but it's important. It's important because it has to do with this. I just realized it. So, why in iconography do we always draw eyes like this? It's because they're humble. They're always looking up at you. So the eyelid, the iris of the eye is always on the upper lid. And if you look at it, an iris that isn't, it looks psychopathic, okay? It looks crazy. You look like you're terrified, first of all. Terrified, yes? Okay. Or someone who you don't really trust. They're looking down on you. Like this is like a Greek god. You little imp. You worm. We don't have any worm. That's like maybe Satan you might draw like that. We don't have people acting like, woo. Everyone's looking like this. They're always looking up at you. Even when they're one of those 11-foot angels, okay? They're always looking up at you. Why? The free will, right? The will that God wills for us is free and it is kenotic. It's humble. It's the will of Christ. So this is important. So you teach people that way by showing them, doing it together. It's really easy to lose this level if you're in a new or overwhelming environment. So if I'm around kids, like when I go to conferences, I always set up a sensory booth or like a little prayer chapel for the kids. And so I'll have kids come in and they're like, I'm freaking out. I'm like, so I just sit down on the floor. So I'm looking up at them, like the icons. And I will go up to them and I'll like try to show them something visual. And I'll say, did you see Mama Mary? And I'll say, did you see this? And I'll pick up a bee or whatever. Be like, let's take it to Mama Mary. And then they're like, look at me like I'm crazy. So I just toss it and they're like, ha ha ha, you could throw stuff in here, whatever. And you get their attention. And then they start to be okay. They start to feel okay. Right. So here's the third thing. Yeah, okay. I think whenever this came up on the thing, it just moved. That's what happened. Okay, you think third. They're supposed to be in this little word bubble, thought bubble, the word words. A lot of times we come at people with words first, and they cannot pay attention to us. They can't. It's not just that they won't. They can't. Because that's not how our attention works. If I'm not safe, I didn't hear a word you said. I'm just thinking how to get out of here. Okay, my flight or fight, if I'm in a good health, is to absolutely fight. I think most people, if they're in a safe, healthy place, will fight or run for it. But they don't usually freeze. But a lot of people, if you're frozen because you're scared of something, you don't hear anything. So written and spoken words finally start to make sense whenever you have feeling first and seeing second, when you have those two things in place. Now, this is the thing that's kind of cool, is that the visual stimuli helps you to think, but also gross motor movements. So when we're in church, we're going to go around the church, we're going to sing Kyrie eleison or something. What are we doing? We're moving our whole bodies, right? So whenever you come into a doctor's office, you're actually making gross motor movements, but we ignore them like they're not the important thing. Get from point A to point B. But, maybe I've seen these things online where a teacher will put, or an OT will put like little stops along the way, right? And if you're a Christian counselor and you have the ability to put a prayer rope in your hallway on the floor, then let somebody bebop along that way. Okay, whenever you're ready, when you're finished with your prayer rope, Lord have mercy, come on into the room. If you have that ability, if you're a teacher at school or something, like give someone the option of saying a few things and coming in, move around the room. So instead of just like, okay, go from point A to point B, that movement from point A to point B is one of the things that's going to shape your attention the most. So do something with it. Don't just put words in your hallway either. You can put images. If you want to teach someone something about something, they're going to be looking around. If you want to tell them, I don't want this to be devious because I don't know what y'all's rules are. But what if you told people whenever you start your sessions, okay, let's stand up and do this. And they're like, okay, now do this. How does that feel? Doesn't matter how it feels. Stand up and do it. Come on, just stand up. Okay, hold out your arms. I'm doing hold out your arms to the side like we're that Da Vinci thing. Now, cross your arms over like you're completely crossing them to the other side. Now do it out again. Now put the other arm on top. Okay? Now, open again. Now I want you to rock back and forth like a little kid going, I'm a little teapot. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Okay, now we've just regulated our nervous systems big time. So what if you started an exam like that and said, okay, welcome. Hey, let's do this first. How do you feel? How do you feel? Do you feel better? So yeah, there's something there. The other thing is you may have a kid that's like, jumping around. Okay, what is he trying to do? Let's do this for him. Let's say, okay, let's bend over and touch your toes. Whoa. Now you're going to put your hands in the air and you're going to lean back. Now kids can probably lean all the way back. Okay, that is like a really cheap way of stimulating your limbic system without a rocking chair, okay? But I'm going to recommend that you get one. Okay. So anyway, what I'm going to show you, I have a slide in a minute. Let me get to this. I'm going to skip ahead and come back. This is the thing I'm showing you. Crossing the midline from right to left. Okay, that coordinates the hemispheres of your brain. If you're autistic, I tell people being autistic is like having a really, really good roadmap, really excellent community like neighborhood roads. Man, there's never a speck of snow in the winter. It's all swept clean. Everything in those neighborhood roads is awesome. I could tell you anything you want to know about certain parts of St. Augustine, City of God. You don't want to know that much about it, for sure. But the thing that could be a trouble, or like the stereotypical train kid, right? Okay, is coordinating across the hemispheres of my brain from left to right and front to back, especially from back to front, I think anyway. So we can encourage this through gross motor movement and through music, which I'll talk to you about it in a minute. But here's the other thing, the movement from front to back, which sometimes wiggle kids are doing, like this, or the rocking kid. It soothes your limbic system. It makes you feel calm and safe. So here's a teenage boy picture that I got. You can just alternating the kid who's like this, okay, I'll do it. They're like mad at you. They're like, I don't want to do this. But you'll see teenagers, they're not just self-conscious. Like if you look at body language teachers, they're self-conscious. They're not. They're trying to regulate. Okay? You see someone doing this, they're trying to regulate. Behavior is communication. The other thing is you shift your weight from side to side and you move your head across that midline. Do it. I have one of my sons, he's 9 now, so it's harder to do because he's getting really tall. Whenever he gets overwhelmed, he comes up to me and says, 2 Basil's a clock. So I pick him up under his arms and I say, tick-tock, Basil's a clock, and I let him rock back and forth. It's getting hard. My husband's having to do weight training to do it now. But he's getting bigger. But let's see. The last thing is friendly fourth. This is the triadic attention. This is what I was talking about. Why it's a big deal that our attention's triadic and that our will is triadic. So if your will is free and you build attention, this is how we're made. The highest form of attention, I'll call it friendliness. It's called joint attention. This is easy for people to remember. That's also called joint attention. This is when we're paying attention to something or someone together. Okay? This is also called triadic. Why is it called triadic? Because it's that thing that St. Augustine described. Although the people who came up with the language, I don't think were Augustinian scholars, but who knows? So if I'm paying attention to something with you, we're both looking, oh, look at that. Yay, way to go, you. Whatever. Or y'all are paying attention to me together, which maybe you're like, oh, you think so. Anyway, when we're focusing on something together, we're learning. This is how you learn, yes? This is how we learn. This is also how we communicate. So a fun thing about this is you can communicate in more ways than just words. You can communicate in joint movements. And in fact, that's one of the major ways, one of the reasons I think the Orthodox Church attracts so many people who are neurodivergent is because we do this. To be part of the group, it's gross motor based primarily. And then we cross our midline, things like this. Yes, okay, it's gross motor based, how you move around a room. Our Christian ed, not so great yet, but we're getting there. Okay. The other thing, shared music. So the part of your brain where everything train wrecks and or coordinates, right in the center, those older parts of the brain are surrounded by the part that processes music. And then your temporal lobe, you get it, your whole brain goes together, works together for music. And so I mentioned music because I think it's really important. And it also helps for Gestalt learning. I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. Gestalt language processing rather than words. So somebody might come in and say a phrase that doesn't necessarily make so much sense, like, what's one of my kids used to come up to me and say, "Wait, mommy." She wasn't trying to tell me that I was going too fast. She just said, "Wait, mommy," as the introduction to "I would like your attention." And so we had this Gestalt. She'd say, "Wait, mommy," and I'd say, "I'm here." This went on for a year and a half, and then she started building her Gestalts out. She's one of my kids. 3 of my kids were nonverbal. They could all talk now. One of them is still. Yeah, so I've done a lot of interventions to help people who are allegedly nonverbal not be. Not by forcing them, though, by learning to communicate. So she would say, "Wait, mommy," and I'd say, "I'm here." Then she moved on to, I finally figured something out with her, though, that's really awesome. And that is that she likes music, and she loves The Lord of the Rings. That's one of her areas of interest. So if I see she's in distress, I go up to her and I give her a hug and I say, da 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 da, and she'll start singing along with me. And when she starts singing along, I know she's okay. Da 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 da. And if she looks upset, I say, dun 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 dun. And if she looks like she's trying to figure something out, I'm like, "Oh, is it this?" And we like to laugh at how the elves in the movies are like this ethereal creature, and in the books they're like sea shanties. Yeah. They're so corny in the books. So they're horrible. They like wake Bilbo up all night. So
like 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, bless my heart. Let me get over here.
If you want to leave some time for questions.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to. What's this? Does this end? Oh, my bad. I didn't mean to talk so much. Okay, so one of the things I want to tell you. So this is the last thing: is all healing is healing on the Sabbath. And communion with God is a type of act of rest. So if we're going to help someone to heal, we need to make them be at rest. Okay, this is and I am going to give you the QR code that you can take a picture, and these will be put up online. All this stuff will be on a Google Drive. So I will go through, but you can do something like this. You can put this whenever you come into your office, have some options and just have them on a list. Visit comfort options. You can have a fan if it's hot, cold water, which is alerting. So if someone's bouncing off the wall, you probably don't want to give that to them. But anyway, offer it. Warm blanket, weighted blanket, heavy books, things like this. Ear protection, balance boards, rocking chairs. You could adjust the lights. So I wanted to show you these because even though the bad fluorescent lights aren't on, if they were on, me having this here to look at would make my brain stop freaking out. I am highly sensitive to those lights. I get migraines and sick to my stomach. But putting a warm light in a room with cold light and a horrible light helps a lot. So that's a trick not everyone knows. It's like you can actually just add instead of take away. If you sometimes you can't change your office lighting. And if you can't, you can do something like this. Selfie light, this is warm, it has a warm mode. I use this on Zoom calls, or you can put these lamps. These are like $15 LED lamps, so I brought them. You can put up Christmas lights, but in a pattern, so they're not freaky. These are some examples for children. You'll see these visual aids. So you do the C-second. You're supporting that to try to tell people how to be familiar. It's not exactly a story, but I have these up on the website too, on the thing. One thing I wanted to show you here. There's a pain scale. So pain scales don't make sense to autistic people usually. This next bit is just advice. So if you need to leave, you can, but it's going to be like a lot of things you need to know. I'm sorry I left it to the end. Okay, so we have unusual interoception. So instead of saying, what's your scale on 1 to 10, whatever, say, model saying for someone who can't communicate easily, I don't like this, it hurts, and point. So like, oh, you've got a bone sticking out of the arm. I don't like this, it hurts. Yeah, it does. But then then you have the ability to say, I don't like this. And then what if there's another injury you don't know about? I don't like this. I don't like this. Oh, I better x-ray that knee too, whatever, So finding out a different way. Another thing, a lot of times pain itches. I don't know why, but it's true. For me personally, I have this problem. Does it feel uncomfortable? Does it feel confusing? Do you feel like the discomfort's keeping you from moving or using the toilet, eating, seeing, hearing, sleeping, things adults do, thinking? I'm going to put that on here, so put it on the internet. Is the feeling keeping you from doing something you want to do? Can you point to where you feel it? These sorts of questions will be more helpful than a pain scale. Then you could also set expectations. This is something I recommend. You don't have to have a social story that's very childish or stilted. I made you a template so you can delete. This is a Word doc that I put in the file for you. And it just has things like, when you get to my office, here's what to expect. And put it in bullet points. Don't put it in a paragraph. It's hard to read. Bullet points, and whichever ones are relevant. And there's some of these that are redundant or don't match for everybody. But there's stuff like which door you go in, where you're going to go. If you have some pediatricians have fish out in the thing, you could say, you can look at the fish. Or if you have sensory measures, you could say, you can ask for one of these, a comfort item. I think that's a great idea, so you might do that. I already told you those things. Let's see here. This is something really important I need to tell you, because I don't think a lot of people know this. So autistic people can have shutdowns or meltdowns. Shutdowns can look like catatonia, but they're not. Or they can look like just being blasé or depression, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's really just shutdown. So some of the things when people helping people track when they're starting to overfunction, so they can put in the things that soothe them. Long walks, journaling, quiet naps, things like this. And another thing is be really wary of giving people food rules, because 80% of us have anxiety and 30% of us have OCD. So food rule is that just asking us to please have an eating disorder. I say this as someone who has had an eating disorder for a long time. So I'm fat by not eating, which is ironic, I know, but my metabolism was shot because people went to the doctor and I was slightly overweight. They were like, stop eating carbs. I was like, okay, which ruined my metabolism. Then I couldn't digest any food. Then I got IBS. Then I got SIBO. And then I couldn't digest, and they kept telling me to I was restricting so much, I was eating a third of what I should have. So I started getting treatment for eating disorder, and I started eating protein, carbs, and fat. And it was like, magic, how can I think and be okay again? And my anxiety disappeared. So things like this, be very careful with this. This question, autistic people will take you literally. So, I'm saying this as someone who's done that. And fasting, when people on the internet should just shut up about it, because it's just really for a priest and a person. They talk about it too much, and very bad effect. But okay, here's your scan. I'm going to come back to it at the end and leave it up. This has the comfort measures, the webpage. Another thing you need to see this. It shows up, autism shows up around age 2 whenever our synapses don't prune. And this is, starting in 2014, this research started to come out. That, I don't know how much they said this is caused by, but it's very strong correlation, that we don't prune our synapses. And for me, this means that I just remember everything since I was a child. Not everyone has that. I have a really good memory. But that's because I'm one of the weirdos. I told you that already. But this is why this matters. Milestones lead to meltdowns. You know this if it's a 2-year-old, right? So if a 2-year-old's all like, I learned how to talk, they act like a holy terror. Okay? Or they're like, oh, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to lay on the floor and sleep. Or they'll get a tooth and they'll sleep. Or they'll get a new ability and they sleep for a day. And you're like, what's happening? It's normal for them. You know that whenever you see it in a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old. Here's the thing. It happens no matter what age you are when you're autistic. And since autistic people are a lot of times not diagnosed or misdiagnosed and don't get interventions until they're older, this happens later. So a 13-year-old who's withdrawing and moody, right? Because that's normal for a 13-year-old whenever their brain starts to develop. What if a 26-year-old is doing it? Okay? What if it's like the 3-year-old has an erratic temper because they just learned how to do a whole bunch of stuff, but all of a sudden, and they're loud, but now it's a 15-year-old doing it. Is that 15-year-old having a psychotic break? No. They just had a milestone. This is a sign of progress. But a lot of people react to this, overreact. It takes a day or two of calming someone down and they're fine instead of several weeks in a psych ward getting mismedicated. Okay, I'm only saying this because I've seen it so many times. I have a lot of friends who run autism schools. A 5-year-old's poor connection between impulse and consequence, but it's in a 9-year-old. It feels more dangerous, but this is a sign of progress. So it's really important. An 8-year-old, object permanence. And all of a sudden, they're very demanding and they want your time because they realize that you're going to go away and come back, but they can also demand that time. But it's a 40-year-old. Why are you so clingy, you weirdo? No. It's normal because this is what you would expect developmentally. But it's going to be at the time, the same intensity level as it would have been in its quote-unquote appropriate or a typical place. So you can be really startled by the intensity of onset, but it's very easy to fix. So all of these moodiness, weeping, surfacing of trauma, yelling, dysregulated movements, looking like you're falling over, wanting to run away, it's really common. The homesteading movement, is that what this is? I don't know. Confusion, apraxia. For me, I have apraxia, which most people can't tell because I'm a musician, but it comes out real strong when I have a milestone. So what you do is you care for someone kindly. You give them naps. Go for walks in nature. Let them move a lot, those midline crossing things, crash pads. You do the proprioceptive and vestibular motion. So look up occupational therapy sensory diets, and you can find a lot of the things you do. You just regulate their senses. Give them time alone. Let them listen to their favorite song on repeat or sing a whole bunch of times or watch their favorite film over and over. Read out loud or silently and paint. Do things that are creative that you would do for a little kid, right? And then, so there you go. You can do these things. Also, literacy and just playing and having fun with your kid is the biggest thing. So I'm going to show all these things and Gestalt language processing. I could stay around and talk to you if you want. I've talked to some of these. So this is the end. So make your environment restful. Notice gestalts and share in them instead of running away from them. And also piggyback learning on gross motor or piggyback incorporate gross motor learning or movements. So there you go. And I'm going to go back to this so you can see all these things. There you go. You can take the picture of that. And you will have everything on that Google Drive. Okay? Good. Sorry.
So
Thanks, guys.
We have lunch at 12:30. It's at 1:15. So we have a few minutes. I wonder if you're open to taking a couple
please
questions.
ask questions.
Before we...
I didn't mean to take so long.
And I did want to say Summer is also part of another workshop.
Oh, tomorrow. Same time.
Tomorrow at the same time. Yeah. Up in the plenary room.
Yes.
So
The fully human one, what is it called? Icons?
it's called Disability as Icon.
Yeah. Disability as Icons. So this Google Drive link is available, and you can come in I couldn't print things out because I didn't know how many people would be here, or I would have printed this for you, but I'll put the slides in there too. Do y'all have any questions? Yes.
So this has all been just amazing for me. I'm autistic. My special interest is late antique religiosity and philosophy.
Nice.
Peter Brown is my hero.
I love him. Yes.
So one thing that you said about this that I share a lot with you about this. You mentioned that thing that I often hear about autism that I've never quite grasped the meaning behind is people say that a person with autism is someone who's found something they're more interested in than people.
That's just old school
I
nonsense.
heard that so much, and I would
Yeah.
love if you could expound upon why that's wrong a little bit, because I love people, especially the way people think.
So one of the things this is why social people and sometimes just smart people who are nerdy don't get diagnosed until they're older in life. Right. So my son was obviously autistic at age 8 when we took him in to get the diagnosis. And his old school psychologist, because we were trying to get the actual one for some school thing in North Carolina. I don't remember what it was. Anyway, otherwise you can get a clinical diagnosis, but whichever. So the doctor said, well, he seems autistic except for he likes people. And I'm like, what's wrong with you, man? I was like, I'm autistic and I like people. It's an old understanding of thinking. This comes out of the early research where they were like, what is this? Is it because their mom is frigid? Is it because they don't know how to communicate with people? They just don't like people and that's why they act weird. It's the double empathy problem is another word for it. So there's this, if you look that up, it's that a failure to have empathy with the way that autistic people communicate naturally. The other thing is, once you're weird, you're excluded from society. Neurotypicals are actually not very flexible. They don't know that about themselves. Forgive us for saying this. But they're not very flexible in their social rules as a general. So if you come up and you say, you're a teenage kid or whatever, and you're trying to get in with a group, if you have a group of really nice kids, sure, but some is you're like, hey, I love, you get them at the right age. I love tall trees. Oh, awesome, me too. Let's go play baseball or whatever. Sometimes they'll grab you in and take you in a group, right? So sometimes a group of neurotypical extroverts will adopt an autistic person, but that's rare. Normally what happens is this. You come in and they're like, oh, I just love cleaning products and wine. And you're like, I think that's stupid. They're like, well, we hate you now. Okay, so that's that's a woman example, okay? You come in and people are like, how about those sports? And you're like, I don't care. Then they're like, oh, we can't be your friend because they don't have a way to say, oh, you're a weirdo. I want to be your friend. Now, some do. I'm just saying in general. So it's a double empathy problem. And a neurotypical person will go up and someone will say, how about them sports team? And the other one says, I don't care for them. I care for this. And they're like, yeah, haha, we get it. And they're like, make that connection. So what they're doing is they're seeking dopamine from society. We actually have chemical differences. Whenever they're around people, just being around other neurotypicals makes them have dopamine or pleasure, they're happy. When we go into society, we get anxiety hormones instead. So we're actually neurochemically different. And the way this shows up is in nature. The only other place I know about this is with bees. So there's 2 types of bees. There's hive bees and forager bees. And the forager bees are like the autistic people. We love to go get information and bring it back to you. And this is how we share our love, and this is how we're part of the hive. But the hive bees get their dopamine, just like humans, from being together. So it doesn't mean that autistic people can't love and have dopamine by being around other people. It's just that we don't have a lot of dopamine, or serotonin, or whatever it is. We don't have a lot of it in general. We don't make them. We get it from trying really hard at something that's hard to do. As weird as that sounds, we're like, I'm sorry, this is too easy. I need something. I have to hit the button 1,000, maybe 1,008 times today before it comes out. So that's us. We have it's like an opposite social hormone programming. But can it be modified? Can you still be made to feel part of a group? Yes. This is not modified, but you can accommodate everybody if you do the things I talked about. So what I do, because I teach a variety of people in my classrooms, when you come into the classroom, you're part of the group. You have an activity to do that's gross motor when you come in. So I have people, I'm going to pretend this is a flower. You're going to bring your flower to Theotokos, and everyone grabs one and brings it in. So they're doing something together right away, and they put it there. And then we all say our prayers together. We don't just say prayers like, I'm gonna, whatever, people looking around. And we grab a play silk, and we all hold the edges of the play silk while we pray. And then, so we're a group. We made a group physically. So the autistic kids, their physical cue has been met. They're like, I'm part of the group. The neurotypical kids are like, this person's part of the group, because that's the level of attention. Even though they might not, if they started at the 3rd level of attention or 4th level, they might not automatically be friendly to an autistic person. they're also wired to really love people automatically too. So are you. So, but you need a different framework to do it. You have to have it done the best way. They don't have to. They have a very high tolerance for things not being done well. We don't. Yeah, that's a difference. We're just not very. We're very tolerant of frustration, but not of imperfection. It's weird, but they're very tolerant of imperfection, but not frustration. So a neurotypical doesn't get what they want right away, and they're like, kick your shoe and walk off, okay? Not necessarily, but we're like, oh, awesome, I'm going to try again for 1,000 million times, okay? We like that kind of thing. High frustration tolerance, very, very low imperfection tolerance, and it's flipped for them. So the point is if you make things and according to the level of attention and assuming that the will is for community and that I know that your will is for community, then I just accommodate it. And then everyone can get along together. So it's like you could just love everything about people. You don't have to be like somebody to love them. Oh, what? Yeah. So
We should probably wrap up so people
yeah, y'all can go whenever you want.
But,
if you have any other questions, I'm
you're
here.
here all weekend?
I'm here until Saturday after lunch. Then I have to go. I have to teach Sunday school on Sunday, so I have to get back to my place.
I don't know about you all, but I think Summer's my new favorite person. I feel like, this presentation is OCAMPR to me. I think some of the general guts of this could be a whole weekend for OCAMPR.
Definitely.
And I'm already proposing that to the board. Like,
Cool.
It's just so deep and also so beautiful a way to share hospitality with this whole huge group of people that make us better, right? So I have to admit, I told you before, I run a neurodiversity support group in a college, and I really resisted bringing the ASD students into the group. And I think some of that was misconceptions. I'm like, well, they're not going to necessarily get the dyslexic kids or the ADHD kids. And man, well,
they probably are
autistic. They
autistic.
snuck in, right?
Yeah.
The ADHD kids also
They're probably
were
autistic.
ASD,
Yeah.
right? So now it's like mostly kids on the spectrum. And it's just so wonderful to see them be able to empathize with each other and share each other's world and experience in a very direct way and know they're not alone, know they're supported, know they're part of community, know that it's okay to be in college and not experience things the way everybody else does. And to know they actually bring different gifts into the classroom that nobody else does, right? The depth of what Summer brought here, I'm sorry, but you may not get this depth in any other workshop that you attend except for her other one, right?
Yes. See. I'm sorry.
It's because of her gift, right?
I may have gone too deep. The reason this matters, it's really everywhere, and I needed to explain it because it's such a big problem.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is a lot of this stuff also in your book on disability?
You know what? I'm going to write another book because what I realized in that book, I talked about triadic attention, and I talked about a little bit about in Accessible Church Go, I talked about the intellect as the perceptive faculty, but I really need to talk about the will because I hadn't identified the will until I started getting mad at some saints I was reading. I was like, this isn't right. It's like, oh, they don't know this. Oh.
It takes being on the spectrum to know that it's okay to be mad at saints, right?
No.
Like, come on, if
The
it's wrong,
saints
it's
don't.
wrong.
No, well, it's not that. It's that.
Reverently.
I love them. They're good. They're still saints. It's none of us are perfect. But what I realized was missing was this Western tradition. It was not that it wasn't in the East. It's just that they didn't write it down because they were like, of course. And in the West, they were explaining to heathens, and so they wrote it down in the same century. It's equally early.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's just like, well, when you write it down, it helps us. Thanks.
There's a professor where I teach who is on the spectrum, and she's an amazing professor. She has a son who's on the spectrum, and at some point, the son heard somebody say that vaccines are
Oh God, no!
cause
It's just
of autism.
genetic.
And her son immediately said, "Oh no, you got it backwards.
Yeah.
It's not vaccines that cause autism. It's
Autism causes
that
vaccines.
causes
That's
vaccines."
true. Exactly. Yes. Autism causes vaccines because we have this incredible frustration tolerance. We're like, why is this happening? What can I do to fix it? And we'll be like, let's just take 20 or 30 years to figure it out. Yeah, that's what I did. So the reason I'm going to write another book is because I took 25 years to figure out. I was like, it's this. This is what was missing.
This may be
My
3
bad.
books, but please keep going.
I'm
So
sorry.
thank you to Summer.
Yeah.
Everybody. Thank you so much. It's wonderful.
I want to tell you,
Put the
yeah.
QR code back up.
Yeah. Oh, well, I want to tell you this.
Okay.
If you look up this thing, Gestalt language, look up this meaningful speech is the person. She's on Instagram, and I think it's meaningfulspeech.com. This person who's sort of leading the way in this thing, and I didn't write it. I meant to write it down there. I think I just forgot is what happened. But it's meaningful speech. And Gestalt language processing is a big deal. We used to think these people were just echolalia doesn't mean anything, but apparently it does. And she does this really great. Sorry, that's not from this. Meaningfulspeech.com. So I wanted y'all to see that. So meaningful. Yeah. Sorry, yes. And I'll put the QR code back. I just wanted to tell y'all that because I forgot. I realized I didn't put it on the slide, so you wouldn't see it any other way. There's your scan code. But yeah, y'all can go, or I'll be here.
Do you have a way for us to reach out or to connect with you? Do you have a YouTube channel, or like do you have?
I need to do one because I used to say, so this is my being autistic, right? I used to say, people on YouTube are stupid. And I was like, oh, wait, no, they're not. I watch YouTube all the time. I was like, I didn't want to be a celebrity. And because I read a book that said celebrities are dumb. And I was like, yeah, but, I'm not going to be a celebrity. Here's my card. That's my Parking Books card. You can write me there or at my, my
You got an
named.
Instagram feed where you do post videos.
Thank you so much.
Let me,
She
so I
does
don't,
put out
I'm going to make a YouTube channel eventually, but for now, I'm just at Summer on all social media. It's some like the myrrh-bearing women. They're my favorites. And also, you see it's a pun. Do you need this thing? Yeah.